Okay, we're live on Facebook, on the page of European Network of Migrant Women. I hope we're in the right place. I am Anna Zobnina. I am the coordinator of the European Network of Migrant Women. And we, as a network, decided to use this opportunity of the global lockdown. But actually, this idea of having live-streamed interviews on our Facebook or social media was in the making. We were thinking about it for a long time, and now we decided that it's a good time to start. And we want to have conversations with different women, the women that we respect, the women whose opinion matters for us, the women who might not have access to traditional mainstream media and have visibility and their voices heard. And the first person that we wanted to speak to is Sodfa Daaji, who is a long-term member in our own network, and she is a member of the Radical Girls. It is the young women's group in our network. But she's also the co-chair of the Afrika youth movement. And she's also, since recently, the founder of the African legal think tank on women's rights. So I will leave it to Sodfa to introduce herself, but really very interesting to hear about your three roles and specifically about this new initiative and the legal think tank in the African context, focusing on the rights of women, if you can tell us about it.
Thank you very much, Anna, and it's my pleasure to be here, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining. So as Anna has mentioned, my name is Sodfa Daaji. I'm Tunisian. I was born and raised in Italy. I'm currently in Forlì. I'm a law school student, but as Anna mentioned, a long-term member of the European Network of Migrant Women, and one of the founding members of Radical Girls, which is the young women group and network within the European Network of Migrant Women. And I'm the co-chair of Afrika Youth Movement, which is a Pan-African youth-led movement with more than 10,000 members across African diaspora. And our mission is to connect, empower, and mobilize African youth. And I'm a strong advocate, activist for women's rights. And I think one of the major things that I started to love to do, because when we take the path of activism, we then learn what is our way of doing activism, our way of connecting to stories and women. And to me was, and currently is, really connecting with women. And I did so in the past 2 years at European and African level. And the African Legal Think Tank is a little bit the response of these conversation exchanges I had with women, but I had also with organizations, with women like you, Anna. And I think the think tank wants to be a concrete response of what we mean by empowering. And to me, it's about helping women in understand concretely what are their rights, helping women-led movement in understanding what are the gaps of implementation, what if there is a need of reform, to campaign for it. Because if we leave aside the whole legal aspect, I'm wondering, what are we doing as activists? What are we doing as civil society? What are we doing as women to claim our rights and to have the rights that we deserve? And so the reason of doing it in Africa is because currently there's a huge gap. There is, I would say, the elite aware of what are their rights, able to have a conversation about it. And we have a percentage of women stuck into male violence and accepting male violence because someone else, most probably a man, told them that that was their role. And my aim as think tank is, from one side, raising within different stakeholders the urgency of making sure that legal experts are within this conversation led by civil society, and making sure that women rights activists and movement have a stronger knowledge of what are the domestic law, but also the international instruments. So we can be one strong voice when it comes to accountability. as a lot of things within these instruments happen in closed rooms, how do we make sure that we monitor? How do we make sure that we are part of the conversation? And I'm referring, Anna, we spoke a lot about it, CEDAW, for example. How do we close this gap and make sure that women are aware that something like CEDAW exists? And most importantly, we can use it. So that's the vision of the think tank, and we want to be a continental initiative. So we are welcoming legal experts who have a real understanding of what women's rights are to join and to support the analysis and assessment of the current legislation at domestic level when it comes to women's rights and assessing what are the gaps.
Mm-hmm. And where are you in terms of your development of this initiative? At which stage you are, and in relation to the COVID situation, which we also would like to discuss, do you have any specific ideas or any calls to the legal experts, whether it's in the African context or not?
We are supposed, the think tank was supposed to be launched on July 11, and that's still the plan. I think we are not ready in terms of capacity, but also July 11 is the anniversary of the protocol, so-called Maputo Protocol on Women's Rights. So that was the reason why we wanted to launch it on July 11. However, there is, we felt the need of starting something in terms of making sure that the message of access to justice is also an essential service. And within this thinking, what we are doing is connecting with several legal experts across the continent to understand how access to justice, which by access to justice, we don't mean simply access to the tribunal. We mean access to legal assistance, legal consultancy, is at the moment at this stage with all these measurements of lockdown or restrictions. So we are doing a sort of continental assessment. So far, for example, Zambia is not in lockdown, however, the judicial system is. Which means that there is a problem even for legal experts to follow what are the current cases, and even more, what is going to happen next when the tribunals will be overcrowded by cases. And of course, there is, especially for women legal experts, the fear that cases like domestic violence will be left as the latest ones, because there will be always something more urgent. And they know very well that in the context we are, most probably these women will forgive the episodes of domestic violence, they will get back to their partner, so it's really an urgency. Another example we had is Nigeria. 2 states are in complete lockdown, and legal experts are afraid about women, but most importantly, women with disability. They feel that the measurements of lockdown have not taken in account the most vulnerable women, which by chance are the women with disability. And so on this case, what we are doing is collaborating with 2 organizations, one in Nigeria and one is a West African organization, writing an op-ed and assessment of how we need to build a system of pro bono access to legal experts, which is governmental, is supported by the government. Because we think that it's not considered just in the funding of access to shelters or women's rights organization. That has to be something institutionalized.
Mm-hmm. And could you tell us a little bit more what is actually happening in the African continent? I don't know if you want to focus on any specific countries in terms of COVID, the lockdown, the impact on women and girls or young women. And I would like to ask you, you're a migrant woman yourself, and you are in Italy in the lockdown. Do you see similarities between the migrant or refugee women in Europe and generally what is happening in the African region, but maybe also among the migrants and refugees? And we know this is the region that is hosting the largest number of refugees, but specifically with a focus on women, young women and girls.
Thank you, Anna. Yes, so let me start with an overview about COVID-19 in African countries. The, the continent has seen something like 1,150 deaths. So you can understand that it's really a small amount compared, for example, to the horrific cases we are hearing in Italy, Spain, in the US, or in the Western world. However, the measures taken by several African countries are good measures because they are aware that their health system, their capacity, their economical system is not able to sustain such a burden or crisis as Italy did, and it's now very affected. So there are more affected or less affected. I will start a little bit with the more affected. In North Africa, all countries have cases of COVID, and I think an alarm from us should start when we analyze about Libya, because now we are merely listening about Libya when it comes to rescuing migrants and bring them to Italy. And we know very well that now we have a strong right-wing presence in Italy, taking the opportunity of COVID to call of not rescuing anyone. But most importantly, is a post-conflictual, even a post-revolutionary country. So that country is not stable at all. And we need to wonder how a crisis like COVID is going to affect a country like Libya and its youthful population, the elder population. They went out from Gaddafi and they don't have a political structure yet. And it has been almost 10 years. And then we have a country like Tunisia. We know that Tunisia had an amazing election. We have a new president in Tunisia. However, just yesterday, the newly appointed government have arrested 2 bloggers because they have criticized the way Tunisia is leading their measures for the containment of COVID, which brings a little bit the similarities with Europe and all over the world. COVID will be used, and is actually already used as an opportunity to take all over the power, to restrict the freedom of dissidents, to restrict the freedom of activists, to put aside important subjects such as freedom of speech, democracy, what are the pillars of democracy, women's rights, sexual orientation, to be put aside because we have something more important, which is COVID-19, and it's a health emergency. Morocco is dealing well, like we have in all African continent countries, the borders are closed, so there isn't a movement between country to country. In some countries, movements are closed between the region or states, like for example, Nigeria, we have 2 states in complete lockdown, the other states don't, so they cannot move from one state to another. How they are practically doing so, we have good cases, failure cases. Tunisia, they are aware they don't have the capacity, so the whole control system is led by robots. They have robots in the street monitoring who's out. While we have countries, Rwanda, have taken leadership in this. They have a complete lockdown, but the government has centralized even the distribution of funds. So if citizens want to offer money to support for COVID, they have an agency doing so. And as a result, Rwandan government is distributing door by door food for every family. They have suspended bills, they have suspended rents. So somehow it's alleviating the situation, which is not the same in some countries like Uganda. Uganda hasn't a complete lockdown, they have curfew. So from 5 p.m. until 5 a.m., no one can go out, which results in a lack of mobility, but also these measures are affecting those who are in the informal sector. And most of the individuals in the informal sector are women. We think about women in the market, manufacturer women. And if we think of Algeria, for example, now that the borders are completely closed, normally women are in the manufacture, in artisanat, so now they don't have any venue of earning. And we know very well that not having any venue of earning for women means being dependent to their men, to their male relatives, which means a source for men to increase violence against women, domestic violence, marital rape. And we are accountant of this. We have seen the same in South Africa. After 1 week of lockdown, 90,000 cases, it's a lot. It really raises the emergency of something that we all knew about it, but it seems that just with COVID, some people are starting to understand that women are not safe in their houses. So we can see the common with migrant women. They are part of the frontline service. We are seeing it now. We can see it here in Italy. We are in a country lockdown, but the cleaning ladies coming in our buildings are migrant women. The women taking care of elder people are migrant women. So are they protected enough? Are they supported enough? I don't think so, of course. Like, they have taken measures, they are in the essential service, and definitely this is changing the way we portray essential services and how do we have to allocate resources to this kind of jobs. And then we have migrant women who are in Europe. It's either staying with their kids or it's either staying working. They have to decide which one is important. How do I feed my kids, or do I leave my kids alone at home? So it's like a struggle. And the same is, of course, applied in the African continent. I'm thinking of single mothers. They exist. Even if they don't come into the conversation, they exist. So definitely one common thing that I see is that measures of restriction and lockdown have not taken in consideration women's rights. Do I see differences? Of course. We are speaking about a continent. Certain countries, they are still fighting to have access to energy. So definitely our difference is that me and you, we can connect on a laptop and have a chat and connect with our relatives, but this is not happening for young women, elder ones. And you can even imagine elder ones, they don't even have access to information, if not for radio, which luckily are working, and they are making sure that they deliver and spread information. So the continent has a digital divide, which means that at the moment as youth movement, at the moment as feminists, as women's rights activists, we don't have full access to information. And this is a global issue that we need to raise. As everyone is raising the issue that now COVID has brought us to work from home, who is this us? It's like that percentage of people who are able to work from home because they have the means to do so. Myself, I'm able to attend law school virtually because the university has built the system, but even more because I have a laptop. In African countries, now they are starting the conversation of maybe initiating online courses, aware of the fact that a lot of students, they don't have a laptop. Even more, when it comes to schools and child and girls, removing the physical presence of teachers, removing the physical presence of schools, it means removing them from a safe space. And I'm talking about rural areas. It means pushing these girls back to their families, being submitted to female genital mutilation, being forced into child marriage. And the question we need to raise is, our government, do we have effective system of monitoring to make sure that these episodes of violence do not happen and are not hidden while we have a crisis? My answer is no. I mean, in the African continent, we still have a problem with sex disaggregated data. We still have a problem that girls are not registered, legally registered at birth. So we don't even know how many girls do we have. It's really difficult to even make a scenario statistics at the moment, in my opinion, of how many girls could be submitted to female genital mutilation now. Because are these data taking in consideration girls in the rural areas? Are these data taking in consideration girls who are not legally registered? Because school, we cannot think of it as the school we know it. Very often is something in the neighborhood, in the middle of the street. So that's the issue when it comes to the continent, and that's what COVID is, in my opinion, shining a light on. The fact that we were always aware of violence against women and girls, And now a lot of organization people are talking about it. But this is our opportunity to really write down what are these forms of violence and assessing the potential risk in any crisis. Now we are all afraid and aware of COVID, but what about conflicts? What about revolution? I mean, Algeria, they did an amazing revolution and now they are in standby after weeks and months of protesting. Or let's take Syria. Like these people, these women, these girls are in an emergency situation. It has been 7 years. And I'm wondering, now we are all shaking, but what about the violence that happened in these countries with such different emergencies and crises? So it's definitely my opinion, the positive, if we could call it this way, is for us as activists and feminists to come together with a concrete assessment of what are the problems, even at legal level. And the first one is about, are girls legally registered in this world? Because who are the girls we are advocating for? And then be practical on what could be our next step as soon as this COVID is solved, I would say, or we are more free to move, at least.
But in the African context, we know, of course, like myself being in Europe, but you are now in the lockdown, but we know that you spend so much time in different countries in Africa. What is your opinion? How actively women are participating in any solutions that are being created right now? So we know that there are two institutions. We have the European Union here trying to decide, not very successfully and quite late. And I'm not aware what is happening within the African Union, kind of similar in a sense institution. And we know the participation of women in Europe in those processes is quite low, despite the fact that we have the new commissioner who is a woman and we have commissioner for equality and so on. But we know that the responses are not accounting for realistically for the needs of women or predicting how it will impact the women. In the African context, do you see any, apart from Rwanda that you mentioned, like at the level of the whole African Union, are there women or countries who are more visible and who are really trying to put the women on the agenda in this decision making?
In terms of responding to COVID-19, African Union from the very start has followed promptly the issue of women's rights within this lockdown. You know that the Peace and Security Department has an envoy on women, peace and security, and she's constantly making updates explaining why it's important that these measures are more friendly to make sure that women's rights are protected and respected. So the fact that the envoy makes these statements doesn't mean that the measures currently in place are protecting and respecting women's rights. And I'm talking in terms of shelters. I'm talking of the fact that in some countries we don't even have shelters. I'm talking of the fact South Sudan is a post-conflictual country, a country with 3 ventilators, a country with no energy. There isn't even a way of concretely monitoring or supporting the women who are present. There are a lot of activists, and they are actually making sure when they access to internet to update on what is happening in the country. But even the basic thing that for us seems so easy, which is transferring money, it's not possible. So we have these challenges, but we have also the reaction from women's movement and youth-led movements. They are taking the lead in raising awareness in rural areas as much as in the slums. Women organizations are aware and they are promptly responding, afraid of the cases of domestic violence, marital rape, and most importantly, raising awareness and holding accountable government for the lack of response from police, for example, which is a huge emergency now, because if police forces are now, their duty is to make sure that citizens respect the measures, they will even less care about cases of domestic violence, which in a lot of countries, starting from Tunisia, it's not something that should be a problem or an issue for police. It's something that you can solve if you choose yourself. So even now, it's even more dangerous because there isn't any way of accessing this, the police, authorities. So African women are aware of this. The problem is within the fact that we are locked down, they are locked down at home. How they can concretely support and help. And with IDPs, we think of refugees, we think of Cameroon. If it was not for my co-chair who sometimes sends me updates, I have no clue what is happening in that country. And we know that in that country there are refugees. We know that in the country refugee women use leaf instead of sanitary pads. And what is going to happen now? We have no idea. Like within the digital divide and the fact that they cannot physically access an online platform to tell us what is happening. Now it's further increased because even the activists like me and many others who were able to travel and who were able to be more connected, now we are completely disconnected. We rely on the information we receive.
And could you tell us a little bit more, and this will be my last question. Obviously, women are affected by this crisis in different ways. We know about the interpersonal violence, male violence at home. We know about the elderly women. We know about domestic workers who lost their income, or other women in different informal occupations. But we also know that there are women who were exploited in the system of prostitution. And right now they're in a particularly horrible situation. Obviously, we know it from our members in Europe, and I presume that it's a very similar situation in all other continents. And what is interesting for us to see is that for a long time, the debate on prostitution, that there will be people who would define it as a form of occupation, which is not our position, because we see it very clearly as a form of violence against women and an outcome of unequal power relationship, economic power relationship between women and men, but also the outcome of male sexual entitlement and the traditional roles into which men are brought up. So from this perspective, what we demand from the governments, and we know that our members are very active in those demands, is to protect the women who are in the system of prostitution. They might be in the system right now, but there are also a lot of women whom we know they are at risk of being pushed at this system because they have lost all possible income, including or specifically the women who are in domestic work. At the same time, we see that this situation is used as a pretext, as an opportunity for the industry itself to go to policymakers and tell them that you see how it is. If you had the system as legalized, then they will be covered by measures for unemployment benefits and so on. And of course, we know that this is an absolute myth, because we know the statistics somewhere in Germany where it is a legal industry, or in other countries like in the Netherlands and in Switzerland, or in Belgium, where it is so-called tolerated zone full of migrant women. Where those measures that are offered for somebody who would be traditionally employed actually are not covering women in prostitution. And majorly, maybe if they wanted to, the reality is that very, very rarely women would want to be registered to have this record on their CV that for this period of time they were working in a brothel. And I was just wondering, also connecting this is what's happening in Europe. I do not know if you have a similar debate or discussions around the women in prostitution in the African context, but also if there is such a debate, what are the narratives like in the media, in the popular discourse, what are people are dealing with, what are the perceptions of prostitution? Because realistically, we know from our members there are right now women dying in the streets. They're dying away from the public eyes. They're dying away from police because of under these lockdown measures, but there will be women who are in the forests, for example. They're hiding and they have nowhere to go. They have nothing to eat. They have no telephone credit to call anyone and ask for help, and they're afraid, and they're falling into control of pimps. How is it in the countries in Africa? Please tell us.
Thank you, Anna. I think this question is very much needed, especially when we talk about the African context. I think at least you and I'm sure some of the women who are watching us are very aware of. I'm very vocal about my position on prostitution, and of course I am as well, and even more in the African continent. And I'm saying even more, it's because I see the African continent as a fertile place in which all these Western narratives are coming fastly and brainwashing, especially the youngest generation, by telling them that violence suddenly became so empowering because it's your decision. And I'm talking about prostitution. So far, I got the chance to see just one news about COVID and prostitution on the South Africa broadcast media. I haven't heard about other countries, even Kenya, which is very vocal when it comes to prostitution is empowering entering into the fairy world of prostitution, because these are the more mature countries. Now, of course, COVID and the post-COVID is bringing absolutely the risk and rising the risk for women to enter into prostitution as a result of their lack of opportunities and economic means. And we need absolutely to raise awareness on this as an analysis of post-COVID. How do we make sure that concrete measures are taken to avoid this? And in the meantime, when it comes to even have a debate and discussion, I think that we have several factors to take in consideration when it comes to the African continent. The first one is the God-led position. Africa is a very faithful continent. You can see a lot of churches as well, imam, which is great, but it's also very God-led, especially when it comes to women. Your body is designed by what God says, and automatically prostitution is bad because your body should be for one man and only forever. So it has no analysis. It's like other men coming to me and tell me that I have to devote myself for one man. So that's one. And then we have the influenced position, which I think is the one touching especially the youngest population. It's the position led by, I would like to call them this fancy feminist movement with amazing social media branding, explaining to us why prostitution is empowering. And every time in my head is like, why are you program manager of this organization and you are not a woman in prostitution? If that's empowering, let's give your position to someone else. But this is catchy because the way they frame it, which is a Western framing, it's a global framing, is this industry, which is really going everywhere across the world, frames prostitution as your way of taking the lead and in charge of your body. You decide what to do with your body. But they never explain what are the implications of this form of violence. They never explain the physical and mental harm on the short term and long term. They don't platform survivors. We know very well, as the network, a couple of survivors coming from the African continent who are real survivors, and they are challenging the system of prostitution. And of course, we have the patriarchal-led position, because of course the continent is still very. It's really the patriarchal mindset is there, is strong. Women have a position, women have a role, women should live in this way. And so the result is that we have taken Kenya, for example. The prostitution, the position of prostitution is indirectly endorsed, because definitely you cannot go against churches and the religious leaders. So it's a cheat shot happening behind. And the result is that there are thousands of women who are practically harmed. And the way of dismantling this is, first of all, dismantling all these factors, the God-led position, get rid of it. You can be faithful as you want, but we need to be practical and understanding that not what God is saying is an analysis to protect me as a woman. It's more about controlling me as a woman and my reproductive rights. And then we have the influenced one. The only way to make sure that the influenced one doesn't take the lead on this is empowering small grassroots groups who work in several areas, from the urban to the rural one. And they have to talk with people, especially with young women. And that's a little bit the work we do. That's a little bit the reason why we established Radical Girls, because we are aware that when you influence one young woman and she influences another one, inevitably this becomes a movement. And we know it's expensive in terms of time to change the mindset. But that's what we have compared to these influencing branding groups who take millions from several foundations because they have their own led agenda. And I'm saying this because I wanted to conclude within this mindset. COVID-19 is a global emergency. And this should influence us in understanding that this is the time to lead a global feminist movement. We don't have the luxury anymore to think it in a regional or border perspective, because it's really a kind of conflict and war against patriarchy. And the only way to defeat it is really having this army of women from several countries of the world. And also this sense of solidarity that I see very often coming around in social media. What solidarity if we are not aware of what is happening in women in several countries, in Latin America and Southeast Asia? How can we be this movement of solidarity if we don't take in consideration how women are violated every second, in every form, in every way by men, by power, by the several structures of power? So I think this is the learning lesson that we finally, as a feminist movement, we need to earn, and we need to try to put in practice. It's not easy. You cannot build a global feminist movement, and you cannot especially build it with everyone. Anna, we know that we are hated for our positions, but at least for the women who think, and that's a call for, I don't know how many women are watching us, to reach out. If you are not sure about your position, just reach out. It's about discussing, it's about having a conversation, it's about exchanging positions. And let's really learn what's your position. What do you want to share with us? What's your story? What's the story of your country? What's the story of what's happening with women? That's the only way that we get empowered and get that knowledge to finally make the change. So I think that's the only thing that COVID is influencing me, to the point that it's not anymore just Africa, and it's not anymore just Europe, but it's a global thing. I got stressed every time when I think about women in Yemen. I really feel I want to cry. And I'm like, are we getting liberated until these women are in that famine, bombed every day? I don't think so. So that's, I think, my call for all women listening. Like, just join, even if your position is different. We can talk about it. Let's not be like men. We can talk about it gently, softly.
Or not.
Or not, yes.
Anyway, thank you. Thank you so much, Sodfa. I want to use this opportunity once again to advertise the brilliant Radical Girls, who have their own Facebook page, with 3S in the end, and all their social media. But it's not just about young women or Radical Girls. We wanted to start this conversation with different women. We will be inviting young women, not so young women, women from Europe, not from Europe. We'll continue this conversation, hopefully every week. And I'm very happy with a good beginning, and very grateful to Sodfa that she found time to speak to us in her, I know, very busy schedule. And we'll keep in touch. And thank you to everyone who was here.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Anna.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Ciao.
Thank you so much. Bye.